Now welcome to another edition of Battle of the Heroes and Villains, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll for Quinlan Vos, and then I'll be reading and responding to some of the comments left on the poll. And since it's been a little while since the last time we did one of these, just a heads up for those who are maybe new to these videos or who have maybe forgotten, what we do here is take a character, we vote on them, giving a ranking of A to F in order to give them a final score, and then we compare that score against all the other characters we've done to see where they rank. And how we decide what characters to do, well, that involves a voting system in the comments below where you can respond to my pinned comment down there with a character name, and or you can give a thumbs up to a character in order to vote for them, and whoever ends up with the most votes in the next 24 hours or so will be the winner and the character we do next. Alright, and now that we've covered all that, let's get to the results for Quinlan Vos, where we'll see that 10% of voters gave him an A, 49%, or pretty much half, thought he was a B tier character, 32% then went with a C, which left 4% to give him a D, and a final 5% to rate him as an F. And so when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, Quinlan Vos ends up with an average score of 3.55, which puts him into 56th place overall, and just ahead of Ezra Bridger and Boba Fett, keeping in mind here that he was redone or revoted on after the Book of Boba Fett and saw his score take a pretty big hit after that. He'd been at a 3.92 before getting his own series. Anyway, this is now where we move on to some comments, and I don't know that there will be a ton of them to go over, mainly because there was a very common theme in them, or a couple things that most people pointed out, and one in particular. But I can't do any of that before taking a moment to just thank everyone who votes, comments, and watches these videos, and those of you out there who kept getting on me about getting this series going again, thanks for that. Also, a big thank you to everyone who supports this channel or the other one I do with my wife over on Patreon. We both very much appreciate it. And so let's now get to the comments, starting as we always have with the top rated comment, which this time comes to us from the Cosmic Broadcast, who said, I think the idea of Quinlan Vos as a character is an A, but since we've barely had any on-screen appearances of the character, it's hard to give anything higher than a B. However, I would love to see him introduced in Disney Star Wars future projects sooner rather than later. He's an easy slam dunk as a character. Hopefully someone at Disney sees how well you used him in your Obi-Wan series rewrite and uses that as inspiration. And of course this comment had to bring up my Obi-Wan fanfiction or my rewrite of the series, which has also been kind of MIA for a while now, though I promise I am trying to get to it. Those type of videos obviously take quite a bit of time to write and complete, and time has just been in rather short supply as of late for a lot of different personal reasons. But for those curious, no, I have not forgotten about that series, and I do very much want to get back to it, and very soon, hopefully. As for the rest of this comment, I agree. He's an interesting character more in theory than in concept when it comes to on-screen, or at least in regards to how he's been used in the new canon, or in anything that's considered official canon, because, as we'll discuss in a bit, he is seen a lot more in the expanded universe and has been arguably better there. But as for current official canon, well, we first see him, albeit very briefly and retroactively, in The Phantom Menace on Tatooine, and then we get an episode with him in the Clone Wars animated series, and then there is also the book that features him, as well as Asajj Ventress, called Dark Disciple. And despite it not being Vos from Legends, I'd still call it a pretty good book. It very much reads like a Clone Wars story arc, which it initially was intended to be. It's one of those kind of lost story arcs and is certainly worth the read if you've got the time for it, especially if you like the character Ventress as well and the journey or story she kind of went through during the Clone Wars. It's very much a culmination of all of that. He also then gets sort of name-dropped in the Kenobi series, and we learn that as of 10 years after the prequels, or 9 before the original trilogy, he's still alive and is now working with the Path, but alas, he does not actually show up, which would have been kind of awesome. Would have been great to see him and Kenobi together again, nor do we see him in Jedi Survivor, which also deals with the Path, and felt like he could have been a pretty cool addition to that game. Nevertheless, the game was great, and it just wasn't meant to be there. But certainly it'd be interesting to see Vos show up somewhere, though I'm not sure where exactly. I'm not sure he'd, for example, warrant his own series or anything quite like that. And I don't know how much more we're going to get from that between episode 3 and 4 time period anytime soon, outside of Andor Season 2, which I think there's pretty much no chance he'd be in, as well as Bad Batch Season 3, which he could maybe fit into. Maybe the Bad Batch could even get involved in the early days of the Path. Who knows? Sounds like something they might do. Either way, I do hope to see the character again someday in the near future. Alright, moving on, our next comment comes to us from Busty69D, who said, if we're talking about the EU Quinlan Vos, which excludes his The Clone Wars appearance and the canon book, he is easily my favorite character in the series. His portrayal embodies the idea of how far are you willing to go to make the world better. He was willing to risk going over to the dark side for the sake of finding out who the second Sith was, and never, even for a second, has he strayed away from that goal. He turned to the dark side, but his mission remained the same. He was willing to kill his fellow Jedi brothers like Kay Kruk if it meant getting closer to finding out who the second Sith is. The Clone Wars horribly misrepresented his character. For some reason, they turned him into this wild, wacky character which completely doesn't fit with his character arc in the comic books. As for his canon appearance in the Clone Wars and the Disciple book, I was greatly disappointed with how they handled such a great established character. A for EU Quinlan and C or D for canon Quinlan. And as I was saying before about how many comments were very similar in nature, well, this is the sentiment echoed by many of them, that the EU version of Quinlan Vos is far, far superior to what we got in the Clone Wars, where he was kind of more of a, I think one comment called him a surfer bro, that he was almost kind of this flippant jokester more so than anything else, more so than the very serious character he was in the EU, where you could almost say he is or was the embodiment of the question, do the ends justify the means? How far do you go to stop an enemy, or to find an enemy in this case, before you yourself become something not necessarily worse, though potentially worse if you completely lose yourself, but you compromise your ideals so much that you, to steal one of Obi-Wan's famous quotes, you become the very thing you swore to destroy. And it ties into the moral dilemma, or you could almost even call it the handicap of good, that when you're trying to stop evil, you're fighting an opponent that is unlikely to have limits or restraints when it comes to trying to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve, that they're not worried about how many they have to hurt or kill along the way to get what they want. Whereas if you're good, you obviously have no such luxury, and you have to always carefully weigh the cost or the risk of any action you're going to take, especially when other people are involved, innocent people potentially. And I do think this is a very fascinating question for Star Wars to explore. It's one of the reasons I love Andor, because it very much tackles this question through many of its characters, though certainly Luthen Rael is the main character who deals with this. His epic speech is a perfect example of what we're talking about, when he talks about basically becoming something worse than his enemy in order to defeat that enemy, and that there is no glory or gratitude coming his way in the end if he is victorious. So yeah, to sum it up, EU Quinlan Vos was probably better than Surfer Bro Quinlan Vos in the Clone Wars animated series, and I almost wish they hadn't used Vos, that he'd been a new character in that episode, a different character, because I don't hate the idea of a Jedi that tries to have a bit more fun, or that has a bit more flamboyant personality, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think every Jedi needs to fit into the mold of classic warrior monk. Not that they all do, mind you. Some certainly have more personality than others. But it is nice to see them have fun and be happy and break this idea that they all hate their existence or something, which is an idea some people seem to have, that the Jedi are just miserable all the time and don't actually get any joy out of life, which is the exact opposite of what they do. They are the epitome of joy. Alright, before I ramble on about that, just one more comment here, and it'll come from Garrett the Viking, who said, I think if Dark Disciple had been made into the 8-episode story arc of Clone Wars it was supposed to be before Disney canceled the show in 2013, Quinlan Vos would be considered an A-tier character for most people. And I do tend to agree. For a lot of people, he's a virtually unknown character. Even those who watched Clone Wars, well, they only got to look at him in one episode. Only one time to really experience him, for better or worse, as he was in that show. And though in the book Dark Disciple he wasn't exactly EU Vos, he was certainly much more like it, and it was, of course, a much greater exploration of the character than that one episode of Clone Wars. And he was also more complex in general and far less surfer bro there, which no doubt would have been reflected in the episodes had they actually been made. And as I said before, I do like the book. I recommend it to Clone Wars fans, and I certainly recommend it to Asajj Ventress fans. Though mainly that's because I've kind of long since separated animated Clone Wars series from EU Clone Wars and from the Tartakovsky Clone Wars. I've just come to accept, for better or worse, that many things were, albeit unnecessarily, changed in the animated series. And as I've probably made very apparent before in other videos, I very much enjoy the Clone Wars animated series, as I enjoyed previous stories about Vos and the Clone Wars in the comics. That's just what you have to do to be a Star Wars fan in these days. You have to separate out these sort of different realities and pick the ones you like. Well, before I get into that, it's going to be all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think of Quinlan Vos. Or you can feel free to nominate and or vote for which character we do next. And I promise it won't take another year to do another one of these. Whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.